Most people imagine medieval bathrooms as unbearable places, spaces you would smell before you reached them. But for the people who lived with them every day, a bathroom that smelled all the time would have been considered broken. What mattered was not whether waste existed, but whether it stayed where it belonged. And that difference changes how medieval sanitation actually worked. Before modern plumbing, smell was not treated as something to be erased completely. It was treated as a signal. In a pre-industrial world, people lived among constant natural odors: smoke from fires, animals nearby, food being prepared or preserved, bodies working for long hours. None of this was unexpected. It was the background of daily life. What mattered was not the presence of smell, but its behavior. A smell that appeared briefly and then disappeared was normal. A smell that lingered, spread, or returned too often was a warning. It meant something was not being removed, aired, or managed properly. This distinction shaped daily routines. Spaces were expected to clear themselves. Air needed to move. Waste needed to be taken away on a schedule that people could feel, not calculate. When that rhythm broke, discomfort followed quickly. This is why constant stench would not have been tolerated, even in the medieval world. It interfered with sleep. It disrupted work. It made shared spaces unusable. People did not accept this as inevitable. They adjusted behavior instead. Openings were left unsealed. Structures were placed downwind. Waste was positioned away from where people spent most of their time. Smell was allowed to escape rather than be trapped. This approach relied on exposure, not containment. Medieval sanitation did not aim to hide waste permanently. It aimed to keep it from lingering near daily life. Smell was expected to move away, not remain suspended in enclosed space. Routine made this possible. Waste removal was not reactive. It was anticipated. Pits were checked. Areas were cleared before smell became overwhelming. When removal happened late, smell became persistent, and that persistence signaled failure. In this way, smell acted as feedback. It told people when systems were working and when they were not. It was not ignored. It was interpreted. This is where modern assumptions often break down. Today, cleanliness is associated with invisibility. If something cannot be seen or smelled, it feels solved. Medieval sanitation worked on a different principle. Waste was managed through distance, airflow, and repetition, not disappearance. When those elements were aligned, smell faded quickly. When they were not, it returned insistently. And this understanding shaped the physical design of medieval toilets themselves. Not as sealed rooms meant to isolate waste completely, but as structures built to move it away from daily life through gravity, space, and air. Medieval toilets were not designed to make waste disappear. They were designed to move it away. That distinction explains almost everything about how they worked. Most medieval toilets were built with one principle in mind: separation. Not cleanliness in the modern sense, but distance. Distance from living spaces. Distance from food. Distance from daily activity. This is why placement mattered more than sealing. Privies and garderobes were positioned at the edges of buildings, not the centre. They were tucked into outer walls, extended over pits, or placed in towers that allowed waste to drop downward and away. What mattered was not enclosing smell, but giving it a path to leave. Vertical separation was especially important. The farther waste fell, the less present it felt. Gravity did the work that modern pipes now perform. Waste moved down. Air moved up and out. The living space remained above and apart. This was not accidental design. Medieval builders understood through experience that smell lingered when waste stayed close and dispersed when it was allowed to fall and ventilate. A deeper drop meant less return. A higher opening meant better airflow. Ventilation mattered more than walls. Toilets were rarely airtight. Openings, shafts, and gaps were intentional. They allowed air to move continuously. Smell that moved was tolerable. Smell that stayed was not. This is why medieval toilets were often built outside the main living area or partially detached from it. The goal was not comfort, it was control. Even within castles and monasteries, toilets were positioned carefully. Garderobes extended over moats or slopes. Waste exited the building entirely, carried by gravity and air rather than trapped indoors. What seems crude by modern standards was, within its constraints, logical. These spaces were not meant to be pleasant, they were meant to be brief. Use was short, lingering was unnecessary. The design assumed that people would enter, exit, and allow the system to do the rest. Smell was minimized by duration as much as by distance. This logic extended beyond individual households. Shared toilets followed the same principles. They were placed where airflow was strongest, where waste could be removed easily, and where smell would not drift back into daily life. When these principles were followed, odor remained intermittent. When they were ignored, problems emerged quickly. Toilets built too close to kitchens, pits that were too shallow, openings that allowed smell to travel upward instead of away. These failures were not subtle. They made spaces unusable, and that visibility mattered. Because unlike modern plumbing, medieval sanitation failures could not be hidden behind walls. When something went wrong, everyone noticed, and because they noticed, action followed. Design did not eliminate smell. It managed its movement. But toilets were only one part of the system, because moving waste away from living space solved nothing if it stayed there indefinitely. Distance delayed the problem. It did not resolve it. That responsibility fell to routine, and to the people whose job it was to remove what gravity left behind. Moving waste away from living space was only the first step. What mattered next was what happened to it afterward. Medieval sanitation did not work because waste disappeared. It worked because waste was expected to move and then be dealt with on a predictable rhythm. This is where our modern expectations stop lining up with reality. It is easy to imagine medieval waste simply accumulating, filling pits until they overflowed and poisoned everything around them. But accumulation was a failure state, not the default. Waste had value. In a world where nutrients stayed local, human waste was part of an agricultural cycle. Night soil was collected, transported, and reused as fertilizer. This was not done out of ignorance or desperation. It was done because waste, when managed correctly, returned nutrients to the land that produced food in the first place. This created an incentive to remove it. Pits were not meant to be permanent. They were temporary holding spaces. Their usefulness depended on being emptied before they became a problem. When removal happened on time, smell was brief and contained. When it didn't, smell lingered and spread. Routine mattered more than technology. Waste removal followed schedules shaped by season, weather, and labor availability. It happened more often in warmer months, when decomposition accelerated. It slowed in winter, when cold reduced odor and activity. These rhythms were felt rather than calculated. People knew when it was time. Smell played a role here as well. It was not ignored. It was monitored. When odor became persistent, it signaled that removal was overdue. In this way, smell functioned as feedback, not as an unavoidable condition. This system worked because distance remained small. Waste did not travel hundreds of miles. It moved from pit to field, from town to nearby farmland. Responsibility stayed local. The people who produced waste lived near the land that absorbed it. That proximity made neglect visible, and visibility enforced action. This does not mean sanitation was pleasant or hygienic by modern standards. It was labor-intensive, imperfect, and vulnerable to disruption, but it was not passive. Waste did not simply sit and rot without attention. When removal happened regularly, smell remained episodic. When it didn't, problems escalated quickly. Pits filled faster, odor spread farther, complaints increased, intervention followed. These were not subtle failures. They were obvious, uncomfortable, and difficult to ignore. This is the key difference. Medieval sanitation relied on cycles rather than concealment. Waste was not sealed away indefinitely. It was moved, reused, and reintegrated. Smell was managed through removal, not containment, and this worked until the system was pushed beyond its limits. As populations grew, as cities became denser, and as routines strained under pressure, the balance that kept smell temporary began to falter. And when that happened, sanitation failures stopped being local inconveniences. They became urban problems. Medieval sanitation worked best when scale remained manageable. Small towns, monasteries, and rural communities could maintain routines. Waste moved predictably. Removal happened before accumulation became dangerous. Smell appeared briefly and then faded. Cities changed the equation. As populations concentrated, sanitation systems were asked to do more without fundamentally changing how they worked. More people produced more waste, but removal still depended on labour, timing, and access to land nearby. This did not cause constant failure. It caused stress. When systems were operating within their limits, cities functioned. Waste was removed. Pits were emptied. Smell remained episodic. Daily life continued without the sense of permanent filth modern stereotypes assume. Failure came when pressure exceeded capacity. Season mattered. Warm months accelerated decomposition. Odor intensified faster. Removal had to happen more frequently. When labor shortages, illness, or weather delayed that work, smell lingered longer than expected. What was once a signal became persistent. Population density mattered even more. As cities grew, waste had less distance to travel before it affected others. Pits filled faster. Open spaces shrank, fields moved farther away. Responsibility became harder to localize. This is where breakdowns occurred. Not because people were ignorant, not because they were indifferent, but because systems designed for smaller scales were stretched thin. When removal lagged, smell returned more often. When smell returned more often, complaints rose. When complaints rose, authorities intervened. Intervention did not always mean improvement. Rules were imposed, fines were levied, certain dumping practices were banned. But enforcement required labour too, and labour was already strained. The system became reactive instead of routine. This created uneven sanitation. Some neighbourhoods remained functional, others suffered repeated failures. Wealthier areas could afford more frequent removal. Poorer areas endured longer gaps. Smell became associated with class and location, not because waste behaved differently, but because management did. Failure was episodic, not constant. A city might function well for months, then suffer during a heat wave, a harsh winter, or a population surge. These moments left strong impressions. Travellers remembered the worst days, not the average ones. This is how stereotypes formed, not from daily reality, but from peak failure. Plagues, overcrowding, and rapid urban growth amplified these breakdowns. Systems that depended on routine could not absorb sudden shocks indefinitely. When multiple pressures hit at once, sanitation faltered visibly. Smell intensified. Waste lingered. Complaints multiplied. And yet, even in these moments, the failure was not total collapse. Cities adapted. Temporary measures were taken. Labour was redirected. Waste was moved farther away. The system bent, even if it did not always recover quickly. This is important. Medieval cities were not drowning in waste at all times. They experienced cycles of strain and correction. Smell appeared when systems failed, not as a permanent background condition. This distinction matters, because modern plumbing did not emerge simply to make things cleaner. It emerged to make these failures less visible and less frequent by changing where waste went and who had to think about it. And that shift changed how smell itself was experienced. Modern plumbing did not eliminate waste, it relocated it. This distinction is easy to miss because the effects feel so complete. Toilets flush, odours disappear, bathrooms feel sealed, private and clean. From the user's perspective, the problem seems solved the moment water carries waste away. But nothing has been removed from the system. It has simply been pushed farther from daily awareness. Modern plumbing centralizes what medieval sanitation handled locally. Waste travels through pipes instead of open air. It moves underground instead of downward. Responsibility shifts from routine human labor to distant infrastructure. Smell changes because distance changes. Odor no longer signals timing or failure. It no longer tells occupants when action is required. It is absorbed into a system designed to remain silent unless something breaks. This silence feels like cleanliness, but it is also abstraction. Modern sanitation separates the act of producing waste from the act of managing it. The people who flush do not see where waste goes. They do not smell it. They do not participate in its removal. The system is designed to disappear from thought. This is its greatest achievement and its greatest illusion. Medieval sanitation worked by keeping waste visible enough to demand attention. Modern sanitation works by keeping it invisible enough to forget. One relies on routine and proximity. The other relies on infrastructure and distance. Neither removes waste from existence. They simply define who has to notice it. And this shift changes how we think about cleanliness itself. Because when smell disappears completely, so does the sense of responsibility attached to it. The most important difference between medieval and modern sanitation is not technology, it is perception. Medieval systems kept waste close enough to be managed, but far enough to avoid daily disruption. Smell appeared briefly, then faded. Its presence signaled action. Its absence confirmed routine was working. Modern systems reverse this relationship. Waste is sent far away immediately. Smell disappears at the source. What remains is a sense of resolution that feels final, even though the problem has only been displaced. This distance changes behavior. When responsibility is local, failure is visible. When responsibility is distant, failure feels abstract. The system works until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, the consequences are larger, slower, and harder to trace back to individual action. Medieval people could not forget about waste. Modern people are encouraged to. This does not make one system superior in a moral sense. It makes them different in how they distribute attention and accountability. Smell was not just a byproduct of medieval sanitation. It was part of its feedback loop. When that feedback disappeared, so did a certain kind of awareness. Cleanliness came to mean absence of sensation rather than successful management, and that shift reshaped expectations permanently. We tend to think of cleanliness as the absence of sensation. No smell, no sight, no reminder that anything ever existed. That definition feels natural now, but it is also recent. In the medieval world, cleanliness was not about erasing waste from awareness. It was about keeping it from interfering with life. Smell was tolerated briefly, noticed quickly, and acted on routinely. When it lingered, it meant something had failed. Today, the opposite is true. Modern sanitation trains us to expect silence. Waste leaves instantly, without signal or feedback. As long as nothing rises back into view, the system feels complete. Cleanliness becomes something we experience, not something we participate in. This is the real shift. Not from dirty to clean, but from visible management to distant trust. Medieval bathrooms did not smell less because people were tougher or less aware. They smelled less most of the time because systems were close enough to demand attention before failure became permanent. Modern bathrooms feel cleaner because failure is pushed farther away, out of sight, out of mind, and out of responsibility. And once you see that difference, it becomes harder to think of sanitation as a simple story of progress. It becomes a story about what we notice and what we've learned not to.